Hey everyone, Andrew here. I had volunteered to record this conversation, but unfortunately, it turns out my hard drive doesn't quite have enough space to manage that at the moment. And so, unfortunately, this is going to be a little bit fragmented here. Sometimes I had to quickly just delete some stuff and then start the recording again. So that's entirely on me. I know that moving forward, this will be much better, but this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I hope that you enjoy what's here, and I definitely look forward to joining with you in conversation as we follow Josh through the next books of Paradise Lost. I hope to see you there. All right, so let's go and get to it. Probably one of the most iconic quotes from Paradise Lost that people have heard is that drive of Satan, where it says, "To reign is worth ambition, though in hell, better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven." I think that just is such a great job of demonstrating the absurdity of the hellish tendency. That's all about autonomy, not asking the question of like, what am I for, right? Not asking the question of like, what is good, but simply elevating your own personal freedom above all else. It's something that you really see in C.S. Lewis, especially in The Great Divorce, where each of the ghosts it just wants to latch on to their autonomy above everything else, even to the point of absolute absurdity, rejecting the joy that's right in front of them. And so Lewis definitely pulls on this demonic impulse that we get from Lucifer here. So I don't know, that's one thing that immediately stood out to me. And of course, the really sad thing about this is in that demonic impulse we get from Milton, we also get the postmodern hero, right? Of freedom at all costs. I'm the master of my own destiny. That basically it doesn't matter. Results don't matter. Consequences don't matter. The larger context in which I live doesn't matter. All that matters is me and my ability to define my own reality. And so we get, which is exactly what Lewis is doing when he takes this idea with the Great Divorce. That really what he's doing is he's critiquing modern, or maybe we can say postmodern, understanding of like freedom and what we are for, and this radical isolation. So there's a lot of direct application here to what Milton is doing in our current cultural context.
Who is so stubborn and cast in his ways, and is also so mighty and strong. Yeah, even here when Milton is speaking from the devil's perspective, he's still pointing back to sort of glorify God. Of like, this is why, so that God may bring down the fullness of judgment upon the head of the devil. It's interesting. There's a lot of insights here. Yeah, I think that's the conclusion of my thought.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for sharing. Certainly a lot there, but yeah, I think you're understanding Satan rightly here for sure. And just trying to remember what you said at the beginning. Oh yeah, you're kind of describing have the line here, no light but rather darkness visible, like when you were describing hell. I talked about this in like the overview video, but there's gonna be like this imagery in a sense that just describes and maybe you've seen this too in something like, if you guys, I know Kyle and Andrew have read it, you probably have too, Chase, but like this idea of like light and darkness as it's used like in something like the Ransom trilogy, right? Like where there's this, you get like this sense of this warmth and this light as you get closer to God, as you get closer to heaven, and you get the sense of darkness the further you get away. And I think that's certainly like part of what Milton is doing here. One thing that's actually kind of interesting, and I'll warn you right now, I'm gonna compare Milton and Dante a lot all throughout the semester. If you watch my videos, I've probably already done that quite a bit. But it's interesting because in Dante, in Dante, Satan is, he's, first of all, he's half frozen in ice, so like he's static in a sense, like he can't move. But he's also he's gross looking if you read the imagery. Like he's grotesque. Like he's got like these, somewhat deformed, like bat-like wings that used to be angelic in a sense, and he's three-headed, which is like an anti-Trinity sort of image. But Milton's Satan is much more, he's kind of like a charismatic leader in a sense, right? Like he's sick and he's twisted and he's, really evil in the fullest sense, but he's active. He's like dynamic. He's not static, and that's, I think, kind of like just an interesting thing to ponder there.
Yeah.
And I think too, even just kind of like looking like as like descriptions of hell, like and descriptions of like the demons and anything that's departed from the good, right? Like you'll see this even with Adam and Eve and Earth after the fall, where excuse me, you have like this privation imagery, right? Where I don't know if you're all familiar with this, and I know Andrew for sure is, but like Augustine talked about this concept as like, in Latin it's privatio boni, which just means like privation of the good. So what he's saying there is that evil is not a substance that God had created alongside with good, but rather evil is a corruption of good things, right? So it's not...
We were talking about this exactly on...
the Confessions.
Yeah, you missed it.
Okay, yeah, I didn't remember like what book you guys were at, but yeah, like Augustine talked about this a lot, right? Because he's coming out of Manichaeanism, and he was like a substance dualist at one point in a sense, right? And that's how he's dealing with this idea that like of Christianity, where it's like, oh, how do you not have like two gods, right? Well, it's because evil wasn't created. It wasn't this all-powerful thing. God is good. He is the uncreated, and anything that flows out of him is good, but evil is just corrupted versions of that. They're perverted, right? They're distorted. They're twisted. And you're going to see a lot of that imagery here, just as you would in like Tolkien with Morgoth or Saruman, right? Like just like you would in some sense in like Paralandra with the unman, or even some imagery in that hidden strength, right? It's everywhere.
I think the part that really stuck out to me about the description of hell, though, it's like obviously the privation, is that the word for absence? The privation of light is darkness, right?
Yep.
But it's interesting because like it's a darkness visible. Like the absence itself is so thick, and it's like it is illuminating things. It describes it that way, and so I just think like it's kind of like the shadows that we see now are just like mere water drops and whatever. My analogies are not good, but it's nothing compared to what's there in the abyss. I also think it's interesting because they're talking about how Satan is a dynamic character in this book, and so oftentimes when we're thinking, because we tend to think about God, and so we think, oh, God takes what Satan means for evil and God turns it for good, right? Like he brings the greater goods out of these evils, and then for Satan it essentially flips that right here, right around line 160, and it reverses that to make Satan appear dynamic, because it says, to do aught good never will be our task, but ever to do ill our sole delight, as being the contrary to his high will, whom we resist. If then his providence out of our evil seeks to bring forth good, our labor must be to pervert that end, and out of good still find means of evil, which oft times may succeed, so as perhaps shall grieve him, if I fail not, and disturb his inmost counsels from their destined aim. And so it's Satan is setting himself up as the anti-god, right? Like Satan isn't just being petulant, right? Just looking at good things and trying to make them veer off course. But he's looking at God and he's saying, I want to be his contrary. Or like I want to be the opposite of what he is.
Right. That's how he's setting himself up.
It's a much more dynamic and full picture.
Right. That's how he's setting himself up. But even still, we get this pretty clear idea that ultimately whatever Satan does is folded into the designs of God. Around 210, it says, so stretched out, huge in length, the archfiend lay, chained on the burning lake. nor ever thence had risen or heaved his head, but that the will and high permission of all ruling heaven left him at large to his own dark designs, that with reiterated crimes he might heap on himself damnation, while he sought evil to others, and enraged might see how all his malice served but to bring forth infinite goodness, grace, and mercy, shown on man by him seduced, but on himself trouble, confusion, wrath, and vengeance poured. So Satan is always trying to put himself against the designs of God, and he's going to receive vengeance for that. But whatever he does is ultimately happening under the sovereignty of God, who is using the bent nature of Satan's will to accomplish good ends. Very much like the beginning of the Silmarillion, right, where Iluvatar says to Morgoth that whatever you do, you're but my instrument in accomplishing good and amazing things. And so despite the devil's intentions here, even he ultimately is victim from his perspective of the sovereign goodness of God.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you're going to see that throughout. I mean, that's really, I think, that line, like, heap on himself damnation, it's like it's going to be his end, right? And there's, of course, just like there is in Genesis, there's going to be, this promise coming later in the poem about the seed of the woman crushing the head of the serpent, right? And then that is fulfilled in the Bible. Like we see Genesis, I think it's 3:15, that's where we see that, and it's fulfilled in Christ in the story of the Gospels. And in Milton, that's promised in the middle of Paradise Lost, and it's fulfilled, as we see the events unfolding in Paradise Regained, where Satan's trying to deceive Jesus, just the same way he was trying to deceive Eve. And unlike Adam and Eve, who ultimately fail and are really get sucked into his cunning rhetoric, like Jesus just isn't buying any of it, like, the entire time, right? When he's tempting him out in the wilderness, that's all that Paradise Regained is. It's just Satan bringing out the best rhetoric that he has, and like Jesus is just completely like impassible and unmoved with all of it. And so yeah, like I think in the sense, like, Milton is kind of weaving that throughout his epics as well, if you may.
Yeah, I liked what I'm just about finished with a preface to Paradise Lost by Lewis, and just when he's talking about Satan, he says, like, the divine judgment might have been expressed in the words, "Thy will be done," meaning, like, everything that he's allowing Satan to basically, like, do what he's doing because he knows what's going to happen from it. It's just going to be basically all that you think you want, but you don't actually want. Like, that's not good for you, than him just not being able, like, it's so far-fetched for Satan to even imagine that somebody could want to obey God or worship God.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing just to think of with Satan too, and maybe sometimes the answer is more obvious. You might even be able to argue that sometimes the answer oscillates between kind of two different perspectives of this, but it's like when you listen to Satan talk in this poem, does Satan actually think like there's a way to get back at God, like there's a way to, like, defeat God in a sense beyond just disrupting humanity or corrupting humanity in a sense, or does the entire time, does he actually consciously know that that's the best he can do is just to corrupt humanity and creation? Or even is it kind of murky somewhere in the middle where is Satan is he disillusioned in a sense where he, like, kind of does oscillate between the two? Like, you ever, like, read about, like, people who have, like, severe forms of, like, narcissistic personality disorder or, like, sociopathy, right? It's like they, like, they manipulate and coerce and hurt people, and, you think, wow, like, they're just consciously thinking the whole time about how they're going to, like, get these people and use them to their ends, but a lot of time those people, they actually think, like, they're doing the right thing, right? So it's like, does that play in with Satan in any way? And it's like, it's something to just think about, like, throughout this entire poem, really, is to be like, where's Satan's head at, like, right now? Like, it's like, that's just, we might not even have to answer that right now about book 1. But like, where's Satan's head at? Like in this line, like that he just said, or these series of lines, or this piece of dialogue that he just said, does he actually believe what he's saying, all the way through, or does he know he's full of baloney in some ways? Like, just things to think about. I think it kind of makes it interesting to maybe psychologize Satan in a sense, for the lack of a better phrasing. But I think that's an interesting way to like try to think about like what's going on with him when he's scheming, or when he's having these these conversations.
Yeah, I think that ultimately, and I've not finished the text, and so I don't know what what he's gonna do entirely with Satan yet. But what Augustine says, and I'm inclined to agree with him on this, in the City of God, he's dealing with the question of where did evil come from, and he begins with the garden and says, okay, Adam and Eve, well, they fell to the temptation of the devil. Okay, well, how did the devil fall? How do we get back to the origin of evil? And at that point, he says that evil by nature, as a privation, is a movement away from what is real, and what is real is rational. And so that means that evil, by definition, is irrational. And so, Satan, like, he may have some articulation, some rhetoric on his side as to why he's doing what he's doing, but ultimately, beneath the rhetoric, there's nothing. It's irrational to rebel against God, because, like, where else can you go? To go back to Paralandra, when we get this expression of the unban, or the devil, kind of same thing, reaching into the void. Well, that's exactly what they receive, the void, nothingness. They're stepping out into non-being. And this is one reason, in addition to all of our classical studies, we've also started doing the Star Wars stuff. And this may be a stretch, but it makes sense in my mind. The sequel trilogy, which I don't like, we don't need to get into that, but I actually kind of like Kylo Ren as a villain, simply because he has no clear motivation. He's just this emotional, irrational, petulant child who's rebelling against goodness for no clear reason. And that, I think, is not actually a bad depiction of true villainy, of what evil is. It's irrational, just lashing out against the good because it's there and I don't want it. And I think that kind of at the root, beneath all of his rhetoric, his charming speech, and that's what we find with Satan, nothing. And so I don't know. I think that's actually a decent depiction of evil there.
I started rereading the preamble as soon as.
Oh, you're good. That's. I guess that's my cue to like anything that you have to take away from that preamble. Really, those first the first 26 lines of the poem, like all the way up to where it says "and justify the ways of God to men." Like were there any like specific comments or observations on that one you wanted to like comment on or parse out or anything like that?
I'm going to be honest, there's a good amount of illusions that I don't get, not being super classically trained. So I think in some ways I was distracted reading it. I do, yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I have a ton from this.
It's so interesting because, like, in the book that I have in the intro, he talks about how they added basically notes on the side because the first two books are so, like, classically, like, you need to know stuff to kind of understand what's going on, and so they have like little notes breaking it down. But it seems kind of like
footnotes at all by chance, because those can also be helpful too. Just be like, oh yeah, this is from like Second Chronicles whatever, and they're like, oh yeah, this is from Hesiod's Theogony, right? Like sometimes it's helpful to know where it's coming from.
Yeah, I think this is kind of just like setting up both why he's kind of writing this whole thing, plus kind of going through like Genesis 1, 2, like the very beginning, just to kind of show what's going to happen, and then it goes into the fall after. But I don't know if I know much more than that.
I think it's interesting that he says he wants to justify the ways of God to men. Like he wants to give a defense for it. I don't. Teach me, teacher Josh.
Sure. So, Milton's teaching us. I'm just helping guide a little bit here, since he's dead and can't talk to us in the same way, unfortunately. Still can talk to us. That's part of why we're reading this. But justifying the ways of God to men. So the word that comes to mind here, and this is a direct derivative from classical and Koine Greek vocabulary here. So theos in Greek is God, right? That's like, you see that in the New Testament, the original like Greek. It's always, theos, God. That's the Greek word. And then dikos just means basically justification. Diko, the verb version of dikos would just be like to justify, right? We see that language a lot with like the doctrine of justification, where it's explained in the New Testament. So you put them together.
Basically, theodicy is dealing with the problem of evil,
this is
right? How can evil exist
like
in
circles, and that word is
a reality
theodicy.
with a good and omnipotent God?
Really,
that's a defense.
It's just dealing with that problem of evil.
It's a defense in a sense, because Andrew, it's really, you probably know more about this than I do. But
so justification of God is what it is. Okay.
And so it's like it's responses to the problem of evil, trying to basically say like, we believe that God is all good. We believe that he is all powerful, all knowing. We believe that he is sovereign over all things. Why do bad things happen in the world? Why do wicked things exist? Why does evil exist at all? Right? And that's a huge theme here in Paradise Lost. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, why did God even let this happen? Right? Like, couldn't he have just like obliterated Satan and never let him even get to Adam and Eve? And speaking just purely from just like the omnipotence of God, like, yes, of course, like he could have, blown him to smithereens if he really wanted to, right? He has that power, but it's a matter of dealing with, all the different dimensions of, the doctrine of God, and how his, eternal providence being a key word there. Providence is really, God's agency and work in the cosmos, and especially in his people, right, through the Holy Spirit, but just also in a general sense through nature, through animals, plants, human beings, all of it. It's God's working out his will through human history. God's outside of time, but he's working out his will within time, within created order, right? So this all ties in with what he's dealing with here, right? And Milton is essentially, he's justifying the ways of God to men in that regard. But what Milton's doing is he's in what's called, the tradition of what we know as Christian humanism, right? This was massive in the Renaissance. So like, I think 16th century, like Italy eventually came over to Renaissance, eventually hit England, right? You get like, people like Spencer and Shakespeare and John Donne and like other Milton's at the end of the English Renaissance, right? He's a little bit after all of that. And in this Renaissance Christian humanist tradition, basically it's kind of doing what C.S. Lewis does in a lot of ways, right? And like, if you've ever read the essay Myth Became Fact, like he's riffing on all of these pagan images and stories and these myths and these, philosophies like Plato and Aristotle, and showing how, by the means of God's, natural revelation or general revelation to humanity, they got things right about that were true, good, and beautiful. However, they did not, have this special revelation. And as Christ came incarnate, for the Greeks a couple centuries after that, and for the Romans, like within the Roman Empire itself, Christ came in, and the best of paganism is, perfected by Christianity. And so that's why he's riffing on this whole classical tradition here. It's like Milton loves Homer, Milton loves Sophocles, Aeschylus, Euripides, Plato, Aristotle, Virgil, Ovid, all of these great, most famous Greco-Roman writers of all time. And he's showing how the best of them is just completed by Christianity, which is the best of all, in a sense. So that really all ties in with what he's doing here. It's Milton's, this is his theodicy, right? Like the whole poem is a theodicy in a sense, in that sense at least.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, and that makes sense considering the second half of book 1 is him just listing demons who are gods. All right, you get Moloch, you get Baal, you get Ashtaroth, if I'm pronouncing them right. So that's interesting. No, I'm only connecting the dot now. I had I read the Silmarillion about a year ago, right? Which obviously does a similar thing where evil starts with the fall of the angels, right? And so that's what Milton's doing here. Evil is beginning with the fall of the angels, and oftentimes we can think it starts in the garden, which it's true. Like that doesn't necessarily make sense. And even if you want to say, yeah, that's fine. I digress. So it's interesting. It's interesting to place it there.
Sure. And just on Tolkien real quick, since you mentioned it, like obviously, and I don't actually know how much Tolkien was influenced directly by Milton, whereas like C.S. Lewis, like he loved John Milton and his good friend for a few years there before his good friend Charles Williams passed away in 1945, and that's who this book, A Preface to Paradise Lost, is dedicated to. It's because Charles Williams came to Oxford and he gave all these lectures on Paradise Lost, and so Lewis is super influenced by Milton, and maybe Andrew can comment on this with Tolkien, but my thought would be initially like Tolkien is going to be indirectly influenced by Paradise Lost no matter what, because he's a scholar of English literature. Milton is objectively, whether you love him or hate him, I don't know why you would like English literature and hate Milton. That's like criminal in my mind, but like whether you love him or hate him or kind of like him, think he's pretty good, whatever, like Milton is one of the greatest and most important people in the history of English literature. Like you got like Chaucer, you've got Shakespeare, right? You've got Milton. It's like he's that level of big, right? Like people compare him to Dante. People compare him to Homer. People compare him to Virgil.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine he does somewhere in some of his academic work, but it doesn't get a lot of play, and I can't think of any specific place where Tolkien talks about Milton directly. But I think you're exactly right. Milton's there in somebody writing within the English tradition. But no, I don't know of any direct discussion from Tolkien on Milton.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, right? I think it's easy to say Lewis and, of course, also Charles Williams, who is an inkling figure that more people should read, by the way, just my opinion. But, like, C.S. Lewis is directly influenced by him. He cites him. He wrote an entire book about just Paradise Lost, right? It's obvious that, like, he's really interested in Milton. I'm not sure as much with Tolkien, but not to belabor the point on that one, but Kyle, you also mentioned the end of the book, and I want to talk about, of course, other things too, but I have to make this point since it came up naturally. At the end of the book, we have, Satan he's rallied the truth, right? Like his rhetoric was persuasive enough to get all these fallen angels to get back up and try it again, right? Like, and they're clashing their shields and raising their swords in the air. Like it's epic, right? Like it's like a bunch of orcs like about to charge Helm's Deep. Like they're ready to get in there, right? Like that's what's going on. He hyped him up. He's a charismatic leader. He knows how to get the people going. But he says all these names, right? And we're gonna see much more of this elaborated on in the speeches that different characters give in book 2 at Pandemonium. But the name Milton is going to use names, and obviously the difference between Milton and Homer and Virgil is that Milton's going to talk about the Old Testament a lot, right? Homer and Virgil, they don't talk about the Old Testament. He's never going to use that for any of like the human characters. He doesn't use those names for the angels in heaven. In fact, the angels in heaven, he's only going to use biblical names, right? Like Michael, Raphael, like for example. But he's always going to attribute those to demons, and there's a sense where scholars and Christian humanists have looked back on the Greco-Roman tradition and thought they talk about these gods a lot. Like, what was going on there? They couldn't have just like been just sitting around in a city with no imagination, with nothing but just imagining these things and making them up, right? Do they have encounters or experiences with something beyond, the human hierarchy, right? And so Milton is in a sense like attributing that to potentially interaction with demonology. And I don't know if Milton's directly doing this himself, but there are certainly people in that Christian humanistic tradition who are going to see, yes, like people like Zeus or Hephaestus or Aphrodite or Ares or whoever. Like these, maybe the Greeks were interacting with demons here. Maybe that's where they got all this inspiration from. Maybe that was the celestial, right? Some people say that maybe they were interacting actually with angels, but some people said no, it was just demons, and that's why they didn't have special revelation in a sense. That's a whole can of worms, but that's kind of where the background is going there. Like, and there is a purpose to him naming those characters that way. It's not directly allegorical. Dante is certainly more allegorical and bold, maybe at times arguably a little bit too bold, where he's going to kind of interweave names like Apollo in with like God somehow, and you're just like, is that heresy? Is that idolatry? I don't think Dante meant for it to be. You can argue it is or isn't. That's not something we could get into unless we were in a Dante class, but just giving you the idea there that there's these relationships between that Christian epic and what they're actually doing with the naming conventions for certain characters and why they're using certain classical or ancient, like pagan names in a sense.
Yeah, it's I'm still in that hideous strength right now. I haven't finished it. I've gone through this one a lot more slowly than the first two, but
take your time.
It's kind of like the opposite approach almost, right? Because at the end of Paralandra, you have Venus and Mars, who are just like these beings of complete absolute beauty, and Ransom bathes in their presence for a year, and he comes back the Edenic man, whereas here Milton seems much more, I guess, sort of on that opposite end in terms of just like, no, like these are demonic corruptive influences. I may have misread him, I don't know, I'm no expert, but...
Although I will say that even in Paralandra, Mars and Venus say that their analogs in terrestrial mythology are corrupted versions of the ideals. And so, those who worshipped Mars and Venus in Rome and their counterparts in Greece, that they were aspiring towards something real, but with corrupted, bent desires. And so they were essentially worshipping demons with a desire toward the truth that is naturally embedded in humans. And so the Mars and the Venus that Ransom met on Paralandra and Malacandra were not the same exactly that were worshipped on Earth. And
yeah, I think I remember that line now. But even then, like, there's so much, there's this great sense of virtue that's given to them.
Yeah.
That I suppose I didn't pick up here at the end of book one. And to be fair, like, I hear the name Dagon, I don't want to ascribe virtue to Dagon. Dagon's a bad name.
True that.
Right? Like, I have no reason within my understanding of him to wish to do so. And so maybe I'm putting words in his mouth that he didn't say. Because his examples were quite bad from the Old Testament.
Yeah, and we do see that when we're getting the names of the false gods of the Old Testament here, or sometimes the demons are literally named after like sins. Like it's obvious that Milton wants us to recognize them as such, but at the same time, he'll talk about I don't have it around here. Let's see, somewhere in the 200s, he talks about how they fabled things like Jove casting out Hephaestus, which is a perverted image of God casting out Mammon. And so basically what he's saying is kind of really exactly what Lewis says. When Lewis says that Ransom finally understood what mythology was, it was gleams of celestial strength falling on a jungle of imbecility. That basically, there's some truth there, but just all corrupted and it's all twisted and, in part perhaps because of the demons, right? These fallen angels. But there is truth there. It's twisted and it's perverted.
Yeah, no, definitely good thoughts there.
I liked in the this is in lines 316, 346, where it talks about when Satan's like rousing the troops. And he said they heard and were abashed, and up they sprung upon the wing, as when men wont to watch on duty, sleeping found, by whom they dread, rouse and bestir themselves or well awake, nor did they perceive the evil plight in which they were. Basically just like they're not, like he's a charismatic leader, but they're also like not fully like loving him as a leader. It's kind of like, it says it's somebody that whom they dread, when they're found sleeping. So
you would say, like, do you think their allegiance, loyalty, or maybe just submission to Satan, like, do you think that's like, is it purely based on like a coercive approach? Like, is it like, do you see it as like fear mongering? Like, are they like afraid of him, or a sense, are they afraid of something else, right? Like, why do they follow him, right? Like, is it merely just his charming speechcraft, or why do they follow him, right? Like, why not just give up?
yeah, I mean, I think they're evil as well. They made the decision, to follow him, but then they're also, I would say that they're tormented from him as well, because it's not like evil is even good. Like, evil people aren't even good to evil people. It's not like a big brotherhood, even though it's not the brotherhood of evil. It's just like there's just they could be co-belligerents, but they're not going to be friends.
I think another thing in that same passage, nor did they not perceive... Oh, maybe I misread it. I misread it. Never mind. Forget the thought.
It's okay. Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
Some people try to run with this stuff, and then like they're backpedaling, but they're like, oh my gosh, why did I even start talking? So appreciate the honesty.
I should really write my thoughts down, because I do tend to be very inarticulate when I'm off the cuff, but it's all right.
I mean, you sounded good to me, so I've appreciated your input. That's for sure.
Thanks, teacher Josh.
You're welcome, Kyle. So, I mean, like, why is Milton doing this? Like, is this just like the prequel, right? Is this just like the, to get to Darth Vader, we've got to show why Anakin Skywalker, fell from the light side, right? Like, is that all that he's doing there? Like, what's the point? And I think there's actually a deeply like devotional and spiritual convention to answering this question, but I want to hear if you have any thoughts on that.
So the question is, why is Satan so awesome?
Why does he appear so awesome?
Oh,
right?
good correction.
Like, why does, like William Blake, right? This was William Blake. If you don't know, he's one of the like leading romantic poets. This is like late 18th century, early 19th century in England. So this is about 100 years, a little over 100 years, like after Milton writes Paradise Lost, and he dies like basically right after he finishes his last revision of Paradise Lost. But he's concerned with this. Blake is like concerned with this idea that like Satan is so like prominent and charming in Paradise Lost, and it kind of opened up a can of worms in the 19th century literature of what was Milton doing with his Satan, right? Like, is he like some weird closet Satan admirer, or is he like, what's he doing with that? And if you read chapter 13 of Lewis's A Preface to Paradise Lost, he really answers this question for us. And Chase, you might have read that chapter. You might not have read it yet. I'm not sure, but like, those are valid questions, right? Like, on the surface, why is Satan seemingly so awesome, as Andrew kind of put it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Milton's really just showing us how powerful the seduction of Satan is. That he is a master of rhetoric. It's why in Paralandra, the unmanned wins most of the debates on the level of rhetoric, because he knows how to practice magic, and magic is nothing other than using words to manipulate reality to conform to your will, right? Versus the truth, which is about conforming yourself to reality. Magic is about conforming reality to yourself, and with the use of words. And I think that's what Satan is. It's what he's good at, or at least he's good at pretending to be able to do that.
Was that Chesterton quote? I think it's Chesterton. It's like, no small thing that a spell is a story told in words of overliving men.
Oh yeah, that's actually Tolkien from On Fairy Stories. Yeah.
Oh, is that Tolkien? Okay.
Yep. Due for
yeah, I think I did read like the chapter on Satan, and I know they mentioned Shelley and Blake kind of viewing it differently and he's kind of like going against it in that chapter of what they believe. But I think he's right in saying that like Milton both puts some of like all of our feelings of how we would be, like how pride and different feelings can come out against our Creator that are sinful feelings, that are magnified in Satan. And so that's something that we can kind of connect with. And then I guess, yeah, it's hard to know. I don't think it's like somebody that we should be like pitying or thinking is like worth following. I think that definitely is like a modern kind of view of just like, oh man, we need to like, he was like mistreated. I was just like Google searching Shelley and Paradise Lost, and it like one of the first results was like a little blurb on Reddit, and it said Paradise Lost is a story of how Satan is abandoned by his creator. And it's like, I mean, just reading that, you're like, I don't even know what you're reading, man.
Yeah, certainly a lot can be said there, but I think just like I think this is like one of the overarching things that like C.S. Lewis is getting at with, what he cites as Charles Williams really recovering in like the mid 20th century with like Milton scholarship, as this idea of what Satan was really supposed to be was kind of a bit lost at times, obfuscated at other times within the 19th century. But I'm just going to read a quote. This is literally off of the first page in the chapter, but he says, "For it is a very old critical discovery that the imitation in art of unpleasing objects may be a pleasing imitation." So, like what does that mean, right? Like, it's like, what's pleasing about it in a sense? Like, is it dressed up just for that sake, or is Milton really dressing up Satan in a way to tell us something about ourselves as sinners and active participants in his rebellion, and really in Adam's rebellion via original sin as well, right? Like, is that valid, right? And it's like, I think can all relate to on a high level, but I think you actually could, just like with the Inferno and Purgatorio in a sense, but with Paradise Lost, you can actually read this and read Satan and reflect on how am I like him, right? In a way, like what like am I like this in some ways? And I'm not saying to like draw a complete one-to-one there, but it's like, how is Satan's sin like my own, right? I think there is room for devotional reflection there, and I think there's a point to that at the end of the day. I think there's something to it. I think it's that, and I think it's Milton's commentary on humanity as a whole as well, especially post-lapsarian humanity. Yeah,
and that angle is definitely picked up by Lewis in, say, the Screwtape Letters, right? Where we get the demonic correspondence, but it's about us, right? It's about, recognizing the demonic influence that's at play in us in the mundane day-to-day way that we engage with ourselves and the world and even God. And so he takes that and makes it a lot more explicit. But I definitely agree with that take there.
And I think it was important.
Sure. Go ahead,
I think
Jason.
it was important, just like talking about like the time period that Milton was writing in, and what the society would have thought about Satan, what they would have viewed of hell. Like now we have people that are like, well, hell's not real. Like, what are you talking about? And like then there would have been a lot more people that would have been like, yeah, like, at least the populace, and would kind of recognize more truths than now. Now everything's broken down and questioning, and that kind of even more so than I think Lewis's time when he's writing this is like, okay, it confuses some of the stuff that he may have been trying to get across.
Yeah, definitely. And so, yeah, this is also why, this is why another romantic poet a little bit after William Blake, like kind of contemporary, a little bit after, but John Keats, and he didn't live very long, but was a profound poet of the early 19th century, and he said, "There is death in Milton." And on this, Lewis is really commenting the same thing and saying, in quote, "We have all skirted the satanic island closely enough to have motives for wishing to evade the full impact of the poem." So I think that just really sums up that whole idea really well at the end of the day. And that's really, the crux of it in a sense. We learn about Satan, but we learn about ourselves at the same time. Not sure if anybody else had anything on that, or I could move to a complete another point if you guys are good with that. There's actually one here where, okay, I need to go to Satan's. I think it's the second time he speaks. It's around like line 242. And Andrew, at this point, I'm going to have like a somewhat interesting philosophy question for you that it probed my mind. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it. You don't want to accidentally do like bad source criticism, right? Well, basically meaning that you don't want to like, analyze the sources of, or like the influences in the sense of somebody's writing falsely in a way. So I'm definitely not going to attempt not to do that here, but I'll get to that in a minute. So reading on, let's see, 242. So, is this the region, this the soil, the clime, said then the lost archangel, this the seat that we must change for heaven, this mournful gloom for that celestial light? Be it so, since he, who now is sovereign, can dispose and bid what shall be right. Farthest from him is best, whom reason hath equaled, force hath made supreme above his equals. Farewell, happy fields, where joy forever dwells. Hail horrors, hail infernal world, and thou, profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor, one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven. What matter where, if I be still the same, and what I should be, all but less than he, whom thunder hath made greater, here at last we shall be free. So, okay, Andrew, what I'm getting at.
I've got too many videos and stuff on my computer, so I need to get rid of some of that. All right, back to recording. All right, so you were asking about potential Cartesian influence, and so maybe to better understand the question exactly, what would be the argument here for Cartesian influence?
Like, I guess, like, not specifically, like, is he Descartes? Because I don't think he is in any way, but is there almost like anything that obviously, like, after Descartes, there kind of was like a can of worms opened up to just general like skepticism of like what we can understand and know with the sense experience, right? Is there possibly like any connection there, like just when he's talking about, or even just when he's talking about like the mind, its own place in itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of
Yeah,
heaven?
I mean, I think I can't speak to any direct influence or not, but I do think there's potentially a kindred spirit at play, in that, you just said that Descartes isn't directly responsible for postmodernism. Um, Maybe not directly, but I actually would push back against that a little bit, in that Descartes had a radical break with the pre-modern way of doing philosophy, especially in the Christian world, in that you get the medievals, you get Augustine, who has a very much a faith-seeking understanding mentality. And so we're going to begin with God at the center of reality, and my reasoning is going to flow out of that assertion, or that belief, that pre-rational belief. Whereas Descartes says that I'm going to base everything on my own existence, and then out from there, I'm going to try to reason to the existence of God and the external world and all that stuff. But the center of Descartes' reasoning is himself. That is his starting place. And so he does, I would argue, in his methodology, isolate himself from the world before trying to regain the world. And in so doing, his own autonomy is ultimate. And I think that is largely what we see at Satan here. And this is why I actually would largely credit Descartes, maybe not solely, but I think that he is largely responsible for where we ultimately ended up. Pascal had a very similar critique of Descartes when he said that I'm never going to forgive Descartes because he basically used God because he needed to for his philosophical system, but then beyond that didn't have any real, genuine need for God, which is how you get someone like Nietzsche, who looks back at the history of modern philosophy and says that we haven't really been relying on the idea of God for quite a while. Let's just be more consistent with that. And so I think that Descartes' assertion of his own autonomy.
I've liked listening to the, I'm reading it, but listening to the Ian McDermott version, it does seem to like cut out a little bit, but I don't know, like just some lines here and there, I guess, just that are like more descriptive. I don't know if it was just because they were trying to shorten it a little bit, but it's good.
Yeah, and that could always be, I mean, the ever so trustworthiness of a free audiobook on YouTube, right? I mean,
Yeah.
why would that
Exactly.
I mean, you paid $0 for that. It shouldn't go. I'm just kidding, obviously. But yeah, I mean, that could be actually the reason, if I was to guess. But I did recommend them because they're free. Let's be honest, I recommended that version because I want people to hear Emperor Palpatine's voice narrating Satan. I think the version overall, like, I still think it's an enjoyable radio drama, but yeah, I'd be lying if I said that wasn't my number one reason for recommending that. You could probably research audiobooks online and buy like a really high quality one if you wanted to as well, but I still enjoy that version. The 2018 Ian McKellen one is, of course, also great, so what be so food for thought there too. All right, so no final comments of anybody's, or any questions or anything like that.
I feel good. Looking forward to next week.
All right, yeah, and we will get into the Infernal Council of Pandemonium next week.